Okay, part 4, chapter 7, history of Democrat and Republican parties. So we conquered the 18th and 19th centuries here for the most part. We learned about the dark history that Democrats have and the quite bright and history of the Republican Party in terms of humanitarian, anti-slavery, pro-black uh, platform that they had adopted from the very beginning. Were all Republicans great and perfect? No. Were all Democrats evil and nasty? No. Again, as I mentioned before, it's all about degree and degrees of how bad the Democrats are versus the Republican, or how good they are versus how good the Republicans are, goes all the way back to. They cannot compare themselves with Republicans, so they lie about it or ignore history and revise history in some cases. But the same mentality that the Republicans had about the blacks, they also passed along to women. Now, women said, "Wait, if on those grounds you're going to allow blacks to vote, why would you not on those grounds allow white women to vote?" And many women who were feminists of their day, suffragettes, pro-women's folks, were Republican. Susan B. Anthony and Katie Stanton, all Republican women who fought for civil rights of their generation. And it was Republicans in the 20s. You had Harding and then Coolidge and then Hoover, who all recognized that they had the right to vote. It would never have happened under Democrat rule. Only Republicans could get slavery ending, get blacks the rights they had, and get women the rights that they so obviously deserved. It would never have happened under Democrat presidencies or administrations. And it didn't. I'm not just saying it couldn't have happened, but it did once or twice. It never happened. The Democrats were against every righteous, good thing that ever happened in this country. And they still are. A number of prominent black people in the 18th century and the 19th century were all Republican. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Ida B. Wells, and on and on and on. Some even say that Martin Luther King, all the way well into the 20th century, was a closet Republican. He said he had no affiliation, but there's no possible way he could have aligned himself with the Democrat Party. Because the Democrat Party, from that moment in the early 1960s all the way back till their inception, were against blacks. They had the Dred Scott law that said that blacks are property, but then that morphed into some other heinous things. You had the Jim Crow laws, the segregation of the South and other places, grandfather clauses, literary tests, white-only primaries, physical violence. All of these tactics, all these rules, these laws came out of Democrat administrations and Democrat Congresses and passed by Democrats. They're all from the Democrats, folks. The people who ordered that the schoolhouses be blocked in the South to keep black children from entering were ordered by Democrats. The people who ordered painful, skin irritating, fire hoses be, shot at marchers were ordered by Democrats. The Ku Klux Klan, which continued on, rose up again in the 20s, and then again in the 50s and 60s, were all run by Democrats. Folks, I'm not making this stuff up. This is the history of our country. This is the history of the Democrat Party. loathsome as it is, this is who they are. And they continue to be. They hate, they dislike, maybe it's not hate, whatever, they fear, I don't know what it is. But they've got it against minorities, blacks, Indians, they got it against everybody. They're the true intolerant people. They're the true problem of this country. And they always have been, and they always will be. In 1954, under the Republican Eisenhower administration, another thing happened. When we talk about in 1924, we got women's voting rights under a Republican. In 1954, we had a famous court case called Brown versus Board of Education. And Brown versus Board of Education, it was determined by the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of which was appointed by Eisenhower, Warren, that the schools could not be segregated. That equal opportunity of education in a public school should be allowed to be attended by all people of all races. And therefore, the black children, especially in the South, who were segregated even in school, had to go to special black schools, would now be allowed to attend public school and get the same education as whites. And they blocked the schoolhouses in the South as a result. Governor George Wallace of Alabama was the one who said to his own National Guard, block the school in the South. A Democrat, the Dixiecrats as they were known. The Bull Connors and the George Wallaces of the South fought continuously against anything that gave equal rights and equal opportunities to blacks. These were the true monsters of the day, the true bigots, and they were all Democrats, every single one of them. In 1957, also during a Republican administration and a fairly conservative time in our history, said, oh, we don't want to go to the past. There's all that bigotry in the past, and there's all that hate in the past. Why would anyone want to go in the past? Well, guess what? That was all on you, folks. It wasn't on the Republicans. It was all from you. In 1957, the first Civil Rights Act was put in before Congress. Not 1964, 1957. The Republicans had been pushing for this for years. Finally got to be voted on and voted against, unfortunately, because Democrats held sway in Congress. But the attempt was there. People like William J. Fulbright, a Democrat who was one of Bill Clinton's mentors and heroes, and a huge bigot, voted against it. Al Gore Sr., father of the Vice President of the United States, in another of his inconvenient truths, his father was one of the big bigots of the day. A senior senator from Tennessee, I believe, like his son, who voted against Civil Rights Acts. Which also created members of Congress like Robert Byrd of West Virginia, who was once a Grand Kleagle, meaning the head recruiter of his chapter of the KKK. And they thought that would be a perfect candidate to be a representative in Congress, later senator. One of Hillary Clinton's favorite people. Hillary Clinton also stated that one of her great heroes was Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, who openly and repeatedly said in the early 20th century that she founded the Planned Parenthood as a means of xenophobia, to kill black babies in the womb so there wouldn't be as many of them. An absolute hater of black people. And this is her hero. Everyone knows this is what she said. It's on video. It's on film. 1920s. She was seen on films in front of a group saying this very thing. Woman was a monster. My hero. Anyone who's for Planned Parenthood should look into their history. It was made, and any black who's, that's why blacks are somewhat anti-abortion for the most part. They know the history was about to try to destroy them as a race in this country. That's where Planned Parenthood got its roots from. I'm not making this stuff up, folks. I'm just telling you stuff you'll never hear on a liberal documentary. Both the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 64 and 65 respectively were pushed by Republicans. They just happened to be passed during Johnson's administration, a Democrat, but it wouldn't have even existed if the Republicans hadn't passed or pushed for it. In fact, the Civil Rights Act in 1964, a higher percentage of Republicans in both the House and the Senate voted for it than the Democrats did by a whopping margin. If the Republicans had not voted for it, it would never have passed. It was their bill. It was their act. Democrats take credit for it because it happened to be passed during LBJ's administration, during his time. But it had nothing to do with it. In fact, he fought against it, against Eisenhower in 1957, up to 1957, when he finally changed course and voted for it. But up until then, he was voting against it. What changed his mind, I have no idea. But a lot of other Democrats, they never changed their mind, and they voted against it even in 1964. When finally the last piece of the puzzle was put into place by Republicans, finally giving blacks every single scintilla of rights of white people, and ending Jim Crow, Dred Scott, segregation, inequality, discrimination once and for all, at least on a legal basis. The hearts and minds of Americans would have to come later. But at least legally, there was no place for that garbage. And the Republicans are the ones to be thanked for it. Period. Now, was there some Democrats, like LBJ, for instance, who got on board? Yeah, of course, sure. But percentages are like degrees. A greater degree, a greater percentage of Republicans pushed the thing through, and it passed. That's the difference. The liberals can own lock, stock, and barrel the liberal culture that they've created since the 1960s. They can have it. It's a piece of crap. Culturally, we are messed up beyond all belief. They own it, lock, stock, and barrel. They can have it. I'll take the anti-slavery stuff. I'll take the civil rights stuff. I'll take the history of the Republican Party, thank you very much, and I'll own up to that. You want to compare? Let's compare. You'll lose every time. Historically, Republicans win this battle every single time. To conclude, I'm going to say something I don't like saying, a word I never use and I hate to use it, but it has to be said because in the context of it being said. Remember, we're talking about LBJ being, for the Civil Rights Act and voting for it eventually and signing it into law. But let's not kid ourselves about LBJ, who was a Dixiecrat and maybe just happened to be a little more of a pragmatist when it counted when he was president and saw the writing on the wall back in the 50s. But who was he really? Very famous audio of a statement he made, kind of on the down low, He didn't know it was on audio, and he was not saying it for public consumption. Tells you exactly how he felt and how most Democrats felt even as late as 1966 or 7 or 8, whenever the hell, I guess it was 65 probably, when he started the war on poverty, a war we lost, by the way, and the great giveaways to minorities and poor people in the form of the welfare expansion and whatnot of 1965. He was heard saying, and I quote, "I'll have those niggers voting Democratic for the next 200 years." End quote. Now, I hate that goddamn word, and I'd never use it. But you have to understand how sickening this man truly was in his thoughts. How sickening the Democratic Party really is. What was he saying? What he was basically saying was something that gives light to what is called by conservatives and Republicans today as the big lie. And we're going to get into the big lie and conclude this in our final part next, to finally put to bed this notion that somehow the parties switched miraculously after all this time and became the exact opposites of what they historically had been, just because the Democrats say so. We'll see on the next and final part of Republicans and Democrats' history.